So I want to talk to you today about power, agency, and consequences. We'll be analyzing what powers do programmers have and looking at how that power can be used. I'll show you examples of good and bad applications and also how seemingly neutral ones can turn bad if you're not being careful. So my goal today is to remind you that you have more power than you might think, and to encourage you to make the most of it. And by power, I mean the power that programmers have in particular. The power that comes with being the one with the compiler, being the one that is doing the work that needs to be done, the one writing the code, the one pushing the deploy button. That is a power that is particular for a programmer as opposed to other team members. And I feel like I'm qualified to make a distinction between this programmer's power and the other team member's power because I have spent most of my life, my work life, being those other team members, and I've only recently become a programmer. So I would like to give you a bit of background of how I ended up here. I knew from a young age that I wanted to work with technology and computers. So I applied to the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, which we like to believe is the fanciest university in Sweden. And I studied towards a Master of Science in Information Technology. So I went through all of those networking labs, the compiler courses, the math exams, and I had to write code in a functional programming language called Oz, which no one has ever heard of. And up until this day, I've had no practical application of this other than being able to fully understand this tail recursion joke. Has anyone heard of Oz or Mozart? 2 hands, nice. We'll compare notes afterwards. But I found myself being curious about this topic that everyone else seemed to dislike, and that was testing. For some reason, everyone else seemed to really hate this topic. And if there was one thing that all of my fellow students had in common, it was that they would declare with a passion that they would never, ever work with testing. And I felt this was a bit weird because it seemed like such an important topic. Surely someone would have to want to do this. This is, by the way, my favorite picture of testing. I feel like the woman here is a tester and the guy is a programmer, and she's sort of pointing out an error in his code, and he's not very amused, but he's trying to keep a brave face. That's kind of what it looks like sometimes. So when I got the opportunity to try out testing, I did, and I loved it. I felt like a detective. I was uncovering bugs, and I was trying to piece together why they were appearing, what circumstances triggered them, and how could I reproduce them. And I got to make use of my attention to detail, my logical thinking, and most of all, my creativity. So I kept working in this field. I deepened my knowledge and expertise. I worked with both exploratory testing, but I also made use of my programming skills and wrote some automated tests. And I came to value collaboration, communication, and techniques like BDD, where I could contribute earlier instead of just after the fact. But I also started seeing how these techniques that would break user stories into smaller pieces, or that would improve communication between team members, they made a huge difference on quality. So I wanted to go deeper into those fields and explore them more as well. And I worked as an agile coach for a while, where this was my weapon of choice. I would help teams to plan their work and to find improvements and learn how to communicate better. But when I felt like it was a time to try to look for a new job, I decided that I wanted to be a programmer. For one, if you're working as an agile coach, the feedback loops are super long. So you try to help a team to sort of cut down on their work in process limit, and it just takes months before the lesson sort of truly lands and is understood completely. So I decided that instead I wanted to have a computer tell me that I was wrong every 5 minutes. At least that's a different kind of feedback loop. But I also wanted to write code that would be used by someone. To make something run in production that would have an impact on someone else's life. Hopefully for the better. And now it's been 2.5 years since my first if statement ran in production. Of course, as a fresh programmer, I solved a very, very simple problem by inheritance and all of the bells and whistles that I thought would be useful. I don't think that code exists in our code base anymore. But when people asked me, so what's it like to be a programmer? Because it was such a new thing. Instead of being a tester or an agile coach, what is it like? What's the difference? Something immediately struck me, and that was the power and agency that I now possessed. That was different from when I was working in these other roles. As a programmer, I am in control of my situation in a way that my team members are not. And the difference is that I am the one doing the ultimate work. Without the programmer, there is no software. The actual creating, writing, crafting, or whatever you will call it, is done by the programmer, and that has consequences. One thing that I noticed immediately was that I decided over my time. When I worked as a tester, we would most often work in sprints, and I would have to wait for the programmers to be ready, or feel that they were ready enough to release for test before I could begin my work. And this often put me in a situation where I would have to work like crazy for those final days of the sprint, because that's when I had something to do. And I could do two things to impact this. One is that I could spend time preparing, but there is only so much preparation you can do. And the other one was to kindly ask the developers if they could please split up the user stories into smaller chunks so that I could test something at least a little bit earlier, and we could spread out the work throughout the sprint. But of course, they were the ones deciding if they wanted to help me or not. And not all of them wanted to. This is different as a programmer. I have much more control over when I want to start my work and when I feel like I'm done with my work. As a programmer, I decide what is possible. And I want to illustrate this to you with a story from my dear friend and colleague, Toby, who told me a story about the moment in his career when he felt the most powerless. And that was when he worked as a product owner. So as a product owner, his job was, of course, to prioritize features among each other and to make sure that the ones that were the most important were the ones that were being done first. And so in order to do this, he wanted to have some data. So he asked his team, could you please provide me with some data on which are the queries that are the most commonly used so that I know how to prioritize these features amongst each other? And the team told him, no, that's not possible. Now, Toby's been a programmer most of his life, so he had a feeling that it should probably actually be possible. He went to the operations team and he asked, can I please have the HTTP logs from the machines where this application is running? They gave them to him, and he spent a couple of nights writing a parser, and he could come back to his team with the data and say, well, it was something like this that I had in mind. Here are the top queries that are actually being called. And when you hear this story, you can sort of see the trust crumbling before you. Because as a product owner, you have to make these important decisions. You have to communicate clearly with a customer or a stakeholder, give them proper answers to questions. But at the same time, you are at the mercy of your team. You have to trust the answers that they are giving you. And in this case, this trust was broken. So imagine being in a work situation where you have people trusting you to give them answers, but you can't trust yourself if the answers that you're giving are the correct ones or not. Now we can only speculate as to why these developers would answer that it wasn't possible. Maybe they didn't know how to do it. Maybe they didn't think that it was important enough. Or maybe they just didn't want to. Or a combination of all of these. But the gist of it all is that I feel like when we are asked the question, is it possible? I think that we sometimes rather answer the question, do you know how to do it? And it might not be that I exactly know how to do it right now, but I could find out. Or maybe we answer, do you want to do it? And that is a power that we have. We can dismiss a feature request by a simple, that can't be done, if it makes us too uncomfortable. We also decide who knows about how things work. So if you develop a feature by yourself, you made the decision that it's okay that you are the only one who knows what thoughts went into your head when you developed this feature. What design decisions did you make at what point in time? And you can decide if you want to create any documentation or write any tests. You can decide if you want to share those thoughts later somehow with someone else. Or if you want, you can accumulate more power by choosing to be the only one with the information. And I'm pretty sure we've all met one of those indispensable people in an organization that just have all of the information because they have gathered it and they don't want to share it with anyone. Those people that people are too afraid to fire because if they are gone, then how would we solve this if they're not here? And that's a choice that they have made. You get to decide what quality level it has. You get to choose if you're going to use TDD, if you're going to pair program, if you're going to write integration tests. All of those things are up to you to decide if you're going to do them or not. Now, I'm pretty sure that up until this point, there are some people here in the audience just waiting to protest and saying that I'm wrong. I've got it all wrong. I don't have this power. It's not me that's deciding. It's someone else that's deciding. And one common comment that I get on this talk is that it's actually the team that's decided. We have come together, we made a decision, and that's the way it should be. And the team should decide, and they should stick to it. But I've seen many times how the team decides something in a meeting, and then a week goes by, and at stand-up, someone says, well, I actually solved it in this other way, because they felt like doing it in the other way. Leaving us other to wonder, why did we spend so much time in that meeting trying to find the best solution when it was just going to be ignored a week later? But it is a power that you have as a programmer. You can push out whatever code you want. Now, peer pressure might be keeping us away from doing so, but fear of conflict might be keeping your colleagues away from saying something. You can do pull requests and code reviews, but psychologically, it's difficult to tell someone to do things over. And it's mostly noticeable if you're actually stepping away from a big concept, if you do something completely different than agreed upon. But in many cases, you can make small decisions which suits you better along the way, and those are not as visible. And the only way that I've seen that so far that I can see where we can prevent people from sneaking in their own ideas in this way is actually to do mob programming, when you all need to agree on what code is written and you all push the deploy button together. And take note that this sort of proves the point that it is at the point when the code is written that the decision is made, that the decision manifests itself. It is when you are the one with the compiler, the one that is actually writing the code, that you are concretizing the decision. Another common one is people tell me that, no, you're wrong, it's the product owner that's deciding. They decide which features go into the sprint, and they decide how long it should take. And they never include enough time for TDD, we all know that. But we're conditioning our product owners into what they should expect from us. We train them by giving them estimates where we don't include the things that we feel actually are core to software development. And it's natural because we programmers, we want to solve problems and we want to help people. And we also want to be perceived as smart and competent. And unfortunately, in our society, that is all measured in speed. So we try to be nice and we try to be fast. So I asked on Twitter, what are the things that happen when we as programmers are too nice and do things for people in a way which maybe we wouldn't have done if we didn't feel like we were pressured to? And so here are some of the responses. So people said that you would end up with feature creep, making us break our schedule, which in the long run makes us look bad to management as we never get anything done. People said that we were being overly optimistic about how quick something will be to complete. Or that we would use bad, fast solutions which would lead us to unhappiness and more overtime later. Also low salaries because we're not good enough at standing up for ourselves. So we step into these evil spirals. I want to be helpful and I want to solve it fast. So I don't TDD and I think I can add the tests later, right? But then time runs out on me because I said it would be done by Thursday and now it is Thursday and I don't have time to add them. And I stress myself out and I start introducing bugs. And then I make architectural choices, which mean that not only I, but also my teammates will have to work slower in the future because I'm putting these hinders in their way, in our way. And whatever expectations that my product owner has on me, I've planted them with them. And they are my responsibility because I am the one who trained them that this is the way that I will behave. I put myself into this spiral. But I can also get out of there. The first step is to realize that if I'm not sharing my concerns and my fear, I'm not being considerate towards others. I'm actually hurting them and hurting myself in the long run. If I'm holding these things a secret from people, if I don't tell them that this is a part of the code that's going to be difficult to work with because we have some bad patterns there from before, they don't have the information that they need to be able to make a good decision. And I'm just hiding this from them. So we need to think about the long term and we need to be honest with the people that we're working with. Because the truth is that you are the expert. You're the one with the tools. You're the one who knows how this craft works. You know the work that needs to be done for our software to be successful. So you need to take pride in your work and do the best job possible. And that's what you need to answer your product owner. And that's what they actually expect from you. The contract that we have between the team and the product owner is that they understand and prioritize the needs of the business, but we provide technical knowledge and expertise that is required to meet those needs in an effective way at whatever perspective we're looking at in time. Sometimes it is that it is a short fix because this is not going to be a long-lived thing, but sometimes it is an application that is going to live for a long time, and then we need to consider that perspective. So this is all about communication. And I'm not saying that this is an easy conversation to have, but I'm saying that you should put some work into being able to have that conversation. Part of your job description is to be able to describe why the team needs to make certain choices. You need to be able to understand your product owner and what motivates them. You need to learn their language and express why a refactoring is a good investment, or why mob programming is actually cheaper than having everyone sit by themselves. But we also kind of need to realize that if we can't find and communicate a good business impact for the rewrite that we want to do, then maybe we just want to do it because it's fun. And maybe that's not a good enough reason. But all of these things are part of your job description as a programmer. Part of your job description is to be able to communicate. And if this is a topic that interests you, I would recommend you to go and listen to Sabrina Leandra this afternoon, who I believe will talk to you about how to communicate around larger factorings. And so the last one is usually this one. It's actually my manager who decides. I'm so sorry for this guy who has to represent being a sleazy manager. But it is a stock photo, which was like with a free license, so I assume that it's okay. People often have an idea of what managers would or would not like. And sometimes I've used guerrilla tactics, as I would call it, to introduce concepts which I believe in, because I was afraid that management wouldn't like it. So for example, I trapped our product owner and some developers in a room, and I started tricking them into writing examples in a rough BDD style with the given one dance, without actually telling them what was going on, so that we could get that work going. But this was years ago, and when I look back at these actions, I see that my guerrilla war wasn't maybe as much of a cool war as I wanted to think of it. Maybe it was more of this kind of a war. I was this kitten. Sure, I was in armor, ready for battle, but I was mostly cute and harmless. I was gearing up for a conflict that didn't actually exist. Because no one ever questioned these techniques that I was using. And it wasn't because I was exceptionally stealthy or something like that. Just my assumption about my managers were wrong. They liked the initiative. And I thought I was like pushing the edges of this box in which I was allowed to navigate. But when I did that, I found that the edges weren't actually there. They were somewhere else, further along the way. And I think that we believe that our managers are actually limiting us more than they actually are. Last year, I listened to this talk by Romeo, who talked about how we, in so many ways, are our own prison guards. We follow rules that we think are in place, even though there's actually no one there to enforce them for us. And I wanted to tell you a story from work from last year, which I think illustrates this. So in our development team, we were interested in TDD. So we invited JB Rainsberger to help us get better at it. And we completed his course, which is the world's best intro to TDD, which might actually be the world's best intro to TDD. I can warmly recommend it. And as a final step in doing this, you do it remotely to begin with, he came to Stockholm to hold a workshop with us and to deepen those learnings. And after a successful morning of adding tests to some really nasty legacy code, we went to lunch. And JB asked the group, so what's stopping you from doing this every day? And the response was, management wouldn't like it. Which sounds like a classic, probably reasonable response, right? The only thing was that management was my boss, Toby, who was sitting right next to us. And he was baffled, because he had actually organized the entire course. He had invited JB Rainsberger to come to Stockholm and to help us out, and he couldn't believe what he was hearing. There was no management wouldn't allow it. This was just a thing that we had learned, and an expectation that we had, an assumption that we had, because we were holding each other in our prison. So I think that you actually have more power than you think. And I think that if you try to nudge the edges and see where it gets you, you'll probably get further than you think. And one of the reasons why I think that you can afford to see where your boundaries are. It's because while programming is complex, working as a programmer is actually pretty soft and pretty nice. I'm gonna try to convince you of this. For one, you work in a comfortable environment. Now, at most, we can complain about the noise level in our open plan offices, but you can also just put on your headphones and listen to some music and slip into the zone. There's no heavy lifting. There's no one actually pukes on you. There's nobody who yells at you, and the hours are reasonable. In Sweden, at least, we can schedule a doctor's appointment at any time during the day and just slip out of the office and come back, and no one frowns upon it. This isn't the case if you work in healthcare, if you work as a teacher, or if you work in a shop. You don't have this level of comfort that we have. It's also a pretty safe environment. For one, there is a little crime against programmers that I know of. And for most of us, and I say most of us because I know there are exceptions, you don't have to tell me, but for most of us, our mistakes rarely have any serious consequences. It's usually a financial consequence if we make a mistake. But in the grand scheme of things, people aren't dying around us. And also, for those severe consequences to appear, mostly a couple of people have to screw up along the way. It's not just one person that screws up. It requires a chain of people. Personally, the worst thing that I could do would be to send too many emails to people. That's my worst fear. But it also feels good, right? It's nice to be this person that's finding the solutions to tricky problems, the person who's able to help a user, to be creative in those ways. And you know that feeling when someone comes by your desk and asks you for help, and you can help them, and you get it done, and then they look at you like you're some sort of a goddess? That's a really great feeling. So programming, while it is complex and difficult, and you need to spend a lot of time to learn it, to be good at it, it's fun. And it's not that hard in that sense. So to summarize this first part, we have this combination of having so much agency, and at the same time we can directly influence something which is unique for me amongst the roles within software engineering. Your teammates can't decide over you. The product owner needs the team to realize their vision. You're being paid a decent amount of money, in Sweden, very much amount of money. You work in a comfortable, safe environment, and you spend your days making other people's ideas come to life. I believe that we are playing work-life on difficulty easy. But there is nothing wrong with that, which brings me to the next point of my talk. How are you actually spending your time? You have this power. What use are you making of it? So maybe you're helping society. Maybe like Helena, who is developing drones to use in Malawi to transport medical supplies across distances which would take hours by car, but takes a matter of minutes with the drones. Maybe you're helping society by protecting our privacy, like Peter Sunde, one of the founders of Pirate Bay, who's now founded this company which provides anonymous domain names for you. Maybe you're helping society by saving the planet, like the people at Go Climate Neutral, which will invest money into solar panels and other kinds of environmentally good solutions for us. And if you aren't doing all of those things, should you quit your job? Personally, I can't answer yes to any of these questions. But I know that my work makes me happy. I solve interesting problems, and the warmth and openness of my colleagues and their eagerness to learn new things and their approaches are really inspiring for me. And that's good enough for me in my daily life. But I did quit my last job, because in my view, their choices were having a negative impact on society. And if you are in an organization which just doesn't understand, which doesn't want to improve, then you need to think, are they really worth your time and your energy? So if you are one of those lucky people, like me, who is in a position where I have the skills that are wanted on the job market, that has financial stability and safety, to have the luxury to be picky, then I think that you owe it to yourselves to be picky. Find something that is meaningful to you and make sure that you are happy at work. Otherwise, you're just spending time making investors richer by being miserable yourself. So if you don't appreciate it, you should choose something else. You should acknowledge and be grateful for the privileged situation that you are in and make sure that you make the use of it. And if you need a bit of a wake-up call, you can go to keysleft.com and you can calculate how many keystrokes you have left in your life. And look at, what are you using those for? Are you writing a novel, or are you just emailing your boss? You decide where your energy goes, so you need to take care of yourself. But going back to that power that you have as a developer, one last time. What code comes alive through your fingers? Stack Overflow did a survey of people's ethical choices. If you were asked to write an ethical code, would you do it? Now, I'm assuming that depends on what it is, means that you can, some unethical things you would be okay with, but other unethical things you wouldn't be okay with, I suppose. So it's about 50-50 in this case, I think. But he also asked, who holds responsibility for the unethical code that gets written? Who's the one who's ultimately responsible? Now, we would like to hope that it's someone else. But if we look at the Volkswagen case, is there anyone who has heard of Volkswagen and their emissions scandal? Not that many hands. Okay, who doesn't like raising their hand at conferences? All right, okay. So Volkswagen had a scandal where they would trigger, if the cars were being measured for their emissions, they would report lower emissions than they actually had. And this was a huge thing. But an engineer actually was sent to jail for implementing this. So you might think that you're safe because it's my boss that told me, but it's not necessarily the case. So this is a bad example of using your engineering skills. Another one is working on dark design patterns like this one, which is a payment, Klarna is a payment provider in Sweden, and I think in other countries as well, where they sort of trick people through the UI to ask to pay later, and then they send them fees for being late with their payments. And this is the kind of thing that you could be contributing to with your keystrokes. They receive a lot of criticism for this, and I believe they're in the process of changing their UIs. I just don't want them to get too much burns here. But the point is, it's much easier to find a new job than it is to get your self-respect back. And I think that we should keep this in mind when we're looking at unethical choices. But one thing that is super important to remember is that most unethical code didn't actually start out that way. It started either as a small decision about maybe we should save some of our users' data, or maybe we should nudge the user in this direction to make this action. Or maybe no one just didn't think about what consequences things would have. So I want to show you some examples. We started out with the best intentions, but that doesn't mean that it actually didn't end up in another way. Because the absence of malice doesn't actually mean the absence of harm. Just because you had good intentions doesn't mean that you didn't cause harm. So the first one is Amazon wanted to reduce bias in their hiring to be more fair, which is a good thing, right? But the problem is that if you train an AI on biased material, well, you get more of the same thing. So you need to be careful about that. Microsoft also tried to hop on the AI train with a less than successful result. And here I have two images which aren't showing up. Or maybe they will soon. Okay, let's see. I have some examples of application which most of us can never imagine would be used for harm. So one of those is Slack. So Slack started as an application which would be used within a company, but it's also started branching out into communities, like the Cucumber community has their own Slack where you can join if you want to. And there are some more or less open implementations now, which means that if you are in a Slack channel, you could also end up in a situation where your stalking ex also joins this Slack channel. And there's nothing you can actually do about blocking them. So you will be in a situation where you have to leave this community because you are constantly harassed by someone else and you don't have the option of not seeing those people. And that's Slack working as intended. The other example, which has been rectified now, was an application which was used to send payments to each other, which is a good thing, right? Who wouldn't want to get money? Well, it could also be used here again in the case of an harassing ex, which continued to send $1 every day with a message. So these are examples when you're not actually thinking of the consequences. And you should probably always have the stalking ex in mind when you're looking at your application. And I'm guessing most of you have heard of GDPR by now, right? So we're starting to look at these things. How is data being used? And you should consider how you're handling user data. Do you know what the ultimate use of it is today? And do you know how it will be used in the future? Should you care about those things? There is, of course, a German word for this, which I find lovely, Datensparsamkeit, I suppose, which Martin Fowler writes about, and that is the purpose of not saving as much data or saving as little as you can. Because we need to think about the fact that today we live in a democracy and a time of peace. But if we're not being careful to make good decisions now that we have the freedom to act, we could be opening up holes which, in a time of war and under an oppressive regime, could be used for other things. Those tiny holes can have great consequences. And you decide if you want to be a part of this. And we need to remember this crucial detail. There are a lot of quotes on having choices and not making choices. Since we're in Paris, I decided to go with Jean-Paul Sartre. And the gist here is that you are always making a choice, even if you think that you're not. And this goes equally if you're staying in a job where you're not happy just by not making the decision to leave, or if you're developing a feature which you're not completely sure about. So we have looked at what power the programmer has, the agency that a programmer has as opposed to the programmer's teammates. And I've shown you some examples of good applications of power, some inspirational things, I hope. Also some applications of bad power. But I wanted to give you the reminder that even if you're staying neutral, it might not be as neutral as you think. So with great power comes great responsibility. And one of those responsibilities is to acknowledge that power and use it for good. Good for the human beings around you, your colleagues, your co-workers, your teammates, which might not be in the same situation as you are. Good for your company. Make good decisions. Good for your own health. Make sure that your job is bringing you energy, not draining you. And good for society. If you have the energy, the opportunity, and the will to do something that will help others, I really want to encourage you to do so. But even if you don't, and that's okay, not everyone does have that opportunity. But even if you don't, please don't let evil slip into our society by being idle and not making choices. You have the power over all of these decisions. Thank you.